Let's Talk Podcasts, which is very creative, for where we highlight people who are in podcasting, specifically members of the Feminist Podcasters Collective and other people doing work in podcasting. And today I'm joined by member Nicole Havelka, whose podcast is Just Rest. Your work is Defy the Grind. Am I right? Defy the trend. That's it. Defy the trend. Sorry, it's my brain. And you've been podcasting, I know, for just about a year. Ish.
Not exactly. I mean, less than 8 months since I launched in January 1st. So
yes, but you've been developing your podcast
for way longer than that. Yeah. That's probably been like 2 years if you count development.
We'll talk a little bit about, we'll talk mostly about, I think, that journey, because you did something different than a lot of other people, and certainly than anyone else we've had a conversation with, which was doing some crowdfunding to get your podcast off the ground. And I think that could be really interesting to explore. Before we do, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what your show is about.
Yeah, so Just Rest, Burnout Tips for Everyday Radicals is a podcast for change makers who are tired but not giving up. That's how I count it. And so it's full of both conversations about the reasons for burnout, about people's burnout journeys, but then also I try to include some practical tips at the end, tips for both rest, getting more rest, and resisting burnout culture.
Excellent. And I wonder if you could, we'll start with you answering my question that I've asked everyone, which is, what's the reason you podcast? And then I want to find out a little bit about why podcasting specifically. But what's the reason you podcast?
And you told me it has to be a sentence. So that's,
you got to say, the reason I podcast is,
which is good. The reason I podcast is to create a rest revolution.
Ooh, that sounds very big. And I love that. I love people with big ambitions. So why podcasting? Obviously, anyone can blog. You can use social media. There's like a million ways we can market our businesses. And podcasting is certainly one of those, but it doesn't have to be one. So what was it about? Because you were drawn to podcasting long before you launched. What was it about the medium that you were interested in and that excited you?
I mean, I'm a bananas podcast listener. That was true before I did a podcast. For me, I think part of the appeal, I don't think I knew this about myself until like later in life, but I think I'm just an auditory learner, and that's true for a lot of people. Because some people believe you can't learn and remember. I mean, because they just learn differently. They're like, well, you couldn't possibly read a book on audiobook and remember it. I'm like, I remember it better than when I read it, like honestly, visually. So it's just a matter how it sticks in our brains. And for me, it's listening to podcasts and audiobooks are like, I think a throwback to being young and people reading to you. And I loved being read to as a kid. For that matter, I mean, I'm single and I live alone, so there's no opportunity for regular humans to read to me anymore very often, but like I'd be all about it if there was someone in the room who wanted to do it. So like if that was your jam. I've heard of people doing that. I've never done it.
Well, you can hire people to cuddle you now, so I'm sure you could hire someone to do anything. But,
I mean, if you're willing to pay enough, people will do a lot of things, right?
Really, I think almost anything.
Almost anything.
So it's that, but I think what many people have touched on with podcasting is the intimacy that it could create between you and the listener, and that is something that you enjoyed as the listener, and so you thought you'd like it as the speaker. You've done a full season of your show. Mm-hmm. Is it what you thought it would be? Like, how are you feeling about podcasting now that you've done it?
Yes and no. So, yes, in a way, it's more than I expected. Like it's way more and better in a lot of ways. It does help facilitate relationship and building relationship. That's still, I mean, I'm still a baby podcast, so like I haven't gotten a lot of that feedback, but I have heard, at least in one case, someone who I hadn't met who was referred to me as a coaching client who said, "Oh yeah, I listened to the podcast and then I scheduled a meeting with you." So I know that power of that being relationship building is helping, and that people can hear me talking with guests in the case of my podcast, or occasionally I do solo episodes. People can get to know me in a different way, and they hear a real voice, which I think is a piece of what you're saying, the intimacy of podcasting. and the ability to build relationships. Because I know that there's podcasters I've listened to for years in some cases who feel like friends to me. Now they're totally not, because I don't know them in real life in most
Yeah.
cases. I mean, I know my friends in the Feminist Podcast Collective. I know them outside of the podcast, but it still enhances our relationship because I listen to your podcast sometimes, Becky, and I come back to you, or I post on socials or something like that and say, "Oh, this part of the podcast really grabbed me," or "I did something differently because I got an idea from that podcast." Um, and people do that with other things, other media too. But um, I just think that there is something so powerful about human voices. And was this just in our newsletter that like the number of AI generated podcasts is like obscene, like a third of them or something now? And
A
I'm like,
third of new podcasts that are being created right
oh my
now are
gosh. Well, I got
entirely AI, not just like edited by AI. That's a different story,
right,
but
right,
AI voices in the whole thing. Yeah.
which is I can't even like I'm not even
Yeah.
gonna go
Yeah.
there because there's things I full disclosure there are things like transcription and things like that that I use AI for with the podcast, but these are real live humans, myself included, who are on the podcast, and I think in a world where we're really skeptic, like because we're not sure are people real or we don't have that level of contact, like voices connecting via our voices is really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've also done this year, this is something I've also done this year, is kind of done a deeper dive into my own human design. And apparently I'm designed for podcasting.
Yeah. And it's not for everyone, obviously, either
It's
as
totally
the
not for
person,
everybody.
it's not
Right.
for everyone as a listener or the way we receive information or the way
No.
we give information, but it's great when you have a feeling that I think if you enjoy listening to podcasts, you're probably going to
Yeah.
be more likely to enjoy creating and delivering a podcast, one would
Totally.
assume, right? It's still not for everybody, but it's a
Right.
great thing to explore and
Yeah.
can be one really great part of our marketing ecosystem, or for some people,
Totally.
maybe the entirety. But I think for most people, it's just a part
Yeah.
of an ecosystem.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, and
So,
can I just add something?
yeah.
I'm thinking about the relationship building on two levels. One is with my guests. And one of
Mhm.
the things I plan to do, since there's probably other podcasters listening, and I got this idea from a guest on FPC, is to have a gathering maybe quarterly of all my guests. First of all, because they're really awesome and they should know each other if they don't already, but like, and creating networking opportunities for them. And then that's good for me too in the
Yeah.
long run. But it's a long term relationship strategy, not, not a, it's not that a quick funnel to a product. That's not what
Right.
it's doing.
Yeah, and I think there may be some people for whom that is the thing, but I
Sure.
think for most people it's not. And shout out
Yeah.
to Greg Wasserman of RSS.com.
Thank you. I couldn't remember who it was.
Who had an amazing session for our
Yeah.
members inside of the Feminist Podcast Collective. And I go back to those ideas frequently. His whole thing was about
Totally.
how do we maximize those relationships that we're building with guests? Because too often we sort of see them as just these people who come in and out of our ecosystem briefly to be on our show. But really, a podcast can be a really relationship driven tool and deepening tool, not just with your listeners, as you said, but with your guests as well. So it's great that you took that from
and I've been
that.
holding that idea since before
Yeah.
I launched the podcast.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the launch, because that's where I really want to spend the bulk of our time, because I think I've talked to, quite a few members at this point for this series. I think you're the 9th or 10th of them, which is amazing. And the thing that I think you did differently than pretty much everyone else I've talked to is that you chose the path of crowdfunding your show to get it off the ground, because podcasting can be virtually free, not free. You have to pay somewhere to host it at minimum. You're going to have a computer and a way of editing, or at least a way of recording. You could theoretically do all of those pieces on your desktop with the tools that come with most laptops, but the hosting you'd have to pay. So at minimum, you got to pay hosting, but you could theoretically do a podcast virtually free, or almost, right? However, most people don't want their show to be that show, right? They want to have maybe a decent microphone, maybe a tool, a platform like I'm using Riverside or Transistor or whatever, but tools to help them in the process. And for many people, they recognize that quality editing, quality recording, quality transcription, show notes, all of those things take time. It takes human time, even with the assistance of AI,
Right.
to get all of that in a format, creating graphics, so that our users, our listeners, can have everything that they need presented to them in a way that they want. And that
Hmm.
takes a lot of time and or help, which then takes money, right?
Right.
So podcasting can run a big spectrum from almost nothing to thousands and thousands of dollars an episode, depending on where
Correct.
you're at in that spectrum of, do you use video and how many people are helping you with all of that. You knew about yourself that you wanted help in this process,
Hmm.
that for you to get it done. And I love, because your work is around burnout, so
Hmm.
that you didn't want this to be a thing that leads you to burnout. And we see that so many
Right.
people, so many times, people take on a podcast, don't recognize how much work it's going to be to create the show that they really want to create, and then they burn out on it, and they don't even make it through a season. They don't do 5 episodes. That's why so many shows end after just a couple of episodes. And you didn't want that to happen. Wisely knew that that could be a thing. And so you knew there's a certain amount of money I want to spend. So before we go into how you raise the money, I want you to talk a little bit about what was it that you identified as the need to do crowdfunding for? What kind of expenses were you looking at? And what was it about paying for those things that you knew was important to you versus, again, trying to just sort of bootstrap it yourself?
Right. So the main thing that really, it ended up being the only thing I ended up raising the money for was a launch partner. So I raised the money to hire Alicia Galati of Galati Media, who's a member of the Feminist Podcasters Collective, who I met there and got to know. So I wanted to work with her on my launch. And that I really ended up, I had actually initially set, this is a long story. I don't want to know how long you want to go into, like, all the ups and downs of the
Well, we
crowdfunding.
have 30 minutes ish. I'm trying to keep these
Right? Keep
digestible
them
for
tight.
people. So,
So the
yeah.
short version is this: I originally tried to raise 12,000, which would have covered the cost of Alicia launching, plus some, like, at least a few months of editing, and being able to pay to buffer some of my costs, like you were mentioning, for the technology and stuff, which I don't do a whole lot of, but there are 3 or 4 platforms I use that I have to pay monthly fees for. And so I originally tried to raise, I think it was 12,000 for that. I didn't hit it originally, and I was on Kickstarter, which, fun fact, is an all or nothing platform. So if you don't hit your goal, you don't get any of it, which creates a lot of confusion for the people who gave you money. Because I did raise almost $5,000 that first time, which is a big chunk of it. It wasn't like I raised $4. I raised like almost half of what I needed. And most people are like, "Oh, you just don't get that?" I'm like, "No, your card wasn't charged." So what I ended up doing, and I already knew this was my plan B because I knew it was a risk doing that on Kickstarter. That then what I did is that I did do my best to keep emails. And the other thing that's really tricky in Kickstarter, they don't give you the emails unless you finish. Fortunately, I knew most of the people, or at least if I didn't have an email, I knew how to contact them. So I went back to all of those people. I created my own link in Square, which is one of the processing systems I use. There's an easy way to do a donation link in Square. I made a simple donation link and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry I'm coming back to you again, but can you give me your original donation?" So in that was really, it was bumpy and it was good because in some ways, so what happened is that some people who gave the first time didn't give. There weren't very many of those, but in some cases, some people, like I heard this maybe from 1 or 2 people, their financial situation changed, so they couldn't give it again. For other people, or but I picked up new people because I was still talking about it for longer than the month I originally gave it. So I was crowdfunding up until the minute I paid Alicia in December. So I
Yeah.
started in August, and I didn't finish really crowdfunding until December. That's both the good thing and the not good
Yeah.
thing about having done the crowdfunding. It
And the
sucked
money
a
you
ton of time.
raised was for launching then. So
Purely
what
launching.
helping
That's
just
all
get
I
the
wrote.
thing out, marketing mostly
Yeah,
then,
yeah,
is that
yeah.
okay?
Marketing. Well, what she does is actually produces the show soup to nuts for the first
Oh,
3 episodes.
first 3
So that's
episodes.
what. So it actually made the initial production of the podcast go hyper speed because, and because I was crowdfunding, like I just mentioned, for months, I didn't have any content in the can.
Mm.
Like I just between having like a business to run and trying to crowdfund, which is a high maintenance, high energy thing, like I just didn't get that hardly any content done. So I recorded the first 3 episodes within a week of each other in December,
Got it.
and
And how
then
much?
gave them to her, like because I but if I had done it, so the main reason I crowdfunded, not only to prevent burnout, was because I knew if I bootstrapped it myself, it would take me a year to do all of that on my own.
Yeah.
I mean, just because I'd have to do it piecemeal.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about the taking over and all of that in a second. But
Yeah.
first, how much did you end up crowdsourcing in that first
About
half?
5,000.
So you were
And
able to
that was
recoup.
what basically covered that launch
Got it.
expense.
And you were able to recoup then all the stuff that you had lost through the Kickstarter, basically. Get right back
Yeah,
to
I
that.
did. Between,
Okay.
like, again, I lost a few but gained a few. So it came
Got it.
up about a wash.
All right. So about $5,000 that covered the launch, got you those first 3 episodes out, kind of gave you
Hmm.
that jump start at getting
Yeah.
the season going. The season was longer than 3 episodes, so you at some point had to kind of take over the reins and continue. How did that process go for you, and what did that show you about like
Right.
the demands on podcasters and
Right. Right away
your
in
ability?
December, or right away in January after because we dropped them on January 1st. So literally on the 1st of January, which went really well. I took over after that. I know Becky knows, but people listening may not know that like my computer died in January, literally on January 3rd. The computer I was using, I then got delayed by like a month. So I actually didn't release. I had one scheduled and was able to record a recording for the 4th episode, but I couldn't. I was using like another person's computer and going to the library and all kinds of crazy stuff for a few weeks, so I couldn't do the editing and work that I wanted to do because of all of that. So that was another big wrinkle that had nothing to do with the crowdfunding. It was just lifing. I got a new computer by the end of January ish, and then that's probably when I really started in earnest. And it was so I had a real leg up because one of the things that Alicia gives you are like tons of templates. So, well, she had made all the graphic templates, like that was all done, which made things like on the graphic side easy. Like I had all these templates of emails to send guests, and not necessarily a onboarding process. I eventually built that myself, but at least here are the templates of what you would write people and something to start from, which again is so good to have that in front of you. But it doesn't change the fact that like in the beginning you're like, I mean, I was so overwhelmed by just onboarding guests for a while because I hadn't automated all of that. And how do I do that with an online scheduler and things like that, which now is pretty well set. But that was another couple of months at least of just rewriting templates, figuring out that system, onboarding guests, and then figuring out I had to start editing myself, and doing and she did all the content too. So like the blog version of the blog, the version of the Substack, I had to edit all of that with her, but I didn't like write anything. Like it was,
Yeah.
I had drafts of everything to work from. Where now I do use AI to help me draft from a transcript, but then I rewrite everything. It's
Yeah.
far more time. Like I'm sure most other guests, if they talk about the technicality of podcasting, I spend far more time on the other content than I do on the podcast itself.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. It's not no work, right?
It's
Even when you
not
get
no
your system
work.
in
It is a
place.
lot of work. And I
Yeah.
would
I mean,
say in the beginning, I bet I spend at least 8 to 10 hours per episode.
yeah, and I hear that from people. I mean, I've been doing this now for about a decade almost, and I'm
Yeah.
down to generally around 2 hours an episode
Mm,
or an hour after recording. So usually about an hour for the recording and then another
sure.
hour of work. But that's after so much time and also a real commitment to good enough, which took a long
Sure.
time. When I was not as committed to good enough, I spent a lot more time. So I think
Right.
that's normal.
Well, I've
Um,
learned a little bit more commitment to good enough and just not doing all of I've
uh
had to cut some of the content loose. Like I just couldn't keep it all up.
Yeah, your mic you got a little quiet, just so you know
Ooh,
now.
sorry.
No,
Okay.
it's okay. I think something must have moved. So you also decided to have seasons and have them be a smaller sort of number of
Yep.
episodes, which I'm guessing is also part of that. Like, let me approach this in a way that I know I can sustain.
Right.
What does that look like? Like, what do you expect your cadence to be? And is any of that shifting now that you've done one season?
I don't think the cadence is going to change. I mean, one of the big good enough learnings, and this had to happen. That's happened right away because of the computer snafu in the beginning. Like I had to give up. My plan was to do every other week as my cadence. Um, I had to I had to give that up at times during the first season, and quite frankly, I don't know that it mattered. I know people say you have to be super consistent and have it all together. Like, and there were like, if I had it to do over again, I would have 10 episodes in the can before I started if I could. Like, it's not like I didn't know that. It just wasn't possible to do, right? Like, it wasn't an education issue. I'd spent a year with all of you. Like, I knew how to do that. And I've organized some things before. I knew that it wasn't a good idea to do your first season that way. And then I just had to give up. There were some seasons of busy where I'm like, well, it's 3 weeks between an episode rather than two. I did that sometimes, and that's what ended up happening. Now I'm on a pretty routine. Every other Wednesday, I'm dropping an episode. And
Well,
this
right now you're
season,
dropping
yeah,
some summer, like hold like your
yeah,
appearances on other podcasts.
right.
What does the next season look like? Are you thinking it'll be similar to the first then? Are you thinking about 2 seasons a year? One?
Yeah, I think I'm probably thinking about 2 seasons a year with a break of, I mean, it'll probably end up being sort of fall and then fall and spring ish, kind of thing. I also might go to like one, I'll see how it goes, but I might go to like one season, honestly, kind of during what would be the normal school year, maybe with a few breaks at the holidays. And then either something like what I'm doing in the summer, like dropping encore episodes of one thing or another here and there. The only thing that might speed up a little bit is that I might add some solo episodes that are like solo episodes are much easier and quicker to do. Like you can definitely pound one of those out in an hour. Like that's not a hard thing, hour or two and you're done. So now what I think I do, or what so I might do that, especially, we don't have to go a lot into this, but I'm starting like literally in 2 weeks, I'm starting to live nomadically, starting September 1st. So, I'm planning on sharing that with my audience. So I probably will drop a few solos in there as well.
Yeah.
And those might come in between the longer episodes.
And that will also probably reinforce the good enough approach, I have a feeling, because when you're
Totally
nomadic,
will
it's
reinforce the good enough because
exactly.
it's like, well, that's all it's going to happen with
That's
that.
all right. Well, okay, going back to crowdfunding then. I just wanted to get a feel for what kind of you've learned through that first process. You're not
Yeah.
crowdfunding, I don't think, another season, right?
No, I
Okay.
don't have the energy for that.
Yeah. So,
Like,
well, which is perfect because I want to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of what that experience was like for you.
yeah.
So, let's start on the pros. The cons is obviously going to be some of that stuff around energy
Yeah.
drain and all of that. But what are the
Right.
pros? What was that? What did that experience give you that you are like, yeah, I'm glad I did it for that reason,
Oh, a couple of things. Well, one was a purely personal development thing. I had to get okay with asking for money,
which is huge.
which is huge. And I don't, am I good? Am I good at asking for money still? I'm still uncomfortable with it, but I'm far closer to being neutral, at least, about asking for money for something I want to do. I would say that was like a huge personal growth moment. And what I realized from that, like related to that, is that asking for the money was relationship building. That is really counterintuitive. But I had so many phone calls and Zoom calls with friends and colleagues of people I know from, like, I've had a lot of different kinds of jobs. So, from people I've known my whole adult life, or even longer in some cases, about like just to get to know. And, honestly, those conversations were 90% not about the podcast. They were just catching up with people you love, and that was all it was. And since then, like, there's one example I use a lot is that one of a colleague of mine who I adore, who I worked with when I was in Iowa, actually, Becky, we share that as a place we both lived. um, One of my friends and colleagues from there, we now Zoom once a month, and it came out of that conversation. Like, I originally, like, we chatted or exchanged texts every once in a while, but like we didn't do that. And now it's just a standing thing on our calendars. Like, we do a phone conversation like once a month ish. And then I've been in more regular touch with even some of the other people who gave, and it was such a beautiful experience. And it was not all those, you get all that bunchy feeling, or at least me, you get that gross bunchy feeling inside, like, oh, asking for money is like the worst thing. And it's like, it really isn't. And it actually just enhanced my relationships with people. It was actually really great.
That's awesome.
That was really great personal development. The other thing for the podcast, I would say, is is that people knew I was doing a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's hard to prove this because I don't have I don't have another case that I can compare it to personally. But like, I mean, I think I had higher numbers because of that. Like, so even if people didn't give to the crowdfunding, I had literally been talking about launching a podcast from like July until
And
I launched
let's
in
be honest,
January.
even earlier than that, because you were in the podcast collective for a year, so you had
Yeah,
people
yeah,
there
yeah,
that
that's
had
true.
known for
People in
yeah,
the podcast collective
yeah,
knew it way before that. So
yeah.
like I had been talking about this podcast
Mhm.
for at least a year and then publicly for like, 7 months. So once it hit in January, people knew I was doing it.
Yeah.
And I did have really good help, when I launched to really have it blast out and be in places. So I think that I mean, again, I don't have a test case for saying
Yeah.
how the
Well,
numbers are
there's no way it
better,
hurt.
but I'm almost up to I have 17 episodes now with the summer ones,
Hmm.
and I'm at almost 900 downloads total,
Hmm.
which for a baby podcast is quite a
Yeah,
bit.
that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, so the money, obviously,
Right.
getting $5,000 of much needed money to help get the thing off
Oh,
the
right. I
ground.
would not have
The
been able to hire someone without that.
absolutely, so and
Period.
the help, the flexing the asking muscle, which we all, especially
Right?
those of us conditioned as women, probably need to learn to do more of.
Correct.
The deepening of those relationships that you had, and then
Yeah.
the awareness around the show. Those are all really
Right.
great pluses. So
Right.
beautiful. Now let's talk about the other thing, because I think a lot of people think, oh, I'll just crowdsource something. I'll just
Right.
crowdfund it. That sounds fun. That sounds easy. It sounds like free money, that kind of a thing, right?
Right.
It's not easy, and it was a lot of
No.
effort. So talk to me
Ton of
about the
effort.
yeah, what are the words of caution for people who might think, "Ooh, I'll just crowdfund my next podcast season or the getting a new show off the ground."
Prepare, prepare, prepare.
Mhm.
Don't just slap it up on Kickstarter or make a link in Square or wherever. You have to really, like, before you ever, maybe not before you announce, but before like you do the thing, you have to do a lot of like in fundraising, they call it the quiet phase, like if you're doing a big fundraiser. So one of the things I did that was both scary and worked really well was that I thought about people in my sphere, in my life, who I thought both would who are people who cheer me on, who are supporters, and who I thought might have a little bigger amounts to give. I sent an email. I don't know. It was at least 2 or 3 weeks before the launch of the crowdfunding, and with a good long email that you actually read for me, Becky, to give me some like feedback on, and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Would you consider giving right away or on the day of the first day of the crowdfunding?" Which worked really well. Now, did all those people give right away? No, but they all did give. Like, or everybody who said they would. There were a couple who didn't, who had to decline for various reasons. But like, and here's the other thing: those people did not ghost me. They actually responded. So that's another thing. Like, you get ghosted a lot in the business, in your lives in business. That did not happen with them, and so that was probably that again was a really good thing that I did. I had to get over that, but prepare. That's not something you like. You're not doing it willy nilly. The other thing that you really have to prepare is that you have to get like laser focused, really, really, really clear on what the you have to know your name. You need to know the purpose of your podcast. You have to be able to say that quickly and succinctly and over and be ready to do it 8,000 times because somebody's just hearing about it for the first time, even if you've already said it 1,000 times, right? Like somebody else is hearing it again. And you have to just be in people's faces for a month. And when the initial month is going on, you do get a big response in the beginning. Everybody tells you this. I actually talked to people who had done a lot of crowdfunding, so like I knew what to expect. There's a dip in the middle, but most of it is the messy middle where you're getting almost no money. And then you get a push at the end. And so you have to keep your energy going and celebrate even the $20 you got that week on, you know what I mean? On, so I was doing things, and I haven't done this kind of stuff in years. Like I was making reels, like I don't know that those were worth it, but I was making videos every week. I was sending an email with an update every week. I was sending that to people who might give to me. And that is a boatload of work, by the way, for me. And
Yeah.
I do have some, like, I have some very, very limited hours, but I have some, um, just in general, I have some people who do some assisting of me making graphics and some other stuff for social media and whatnot. But
Well, be prepared to
yeah,
talk about
it
it.
wasn't just
And
me and my team, which is tiny,
right.
but a team that was doing all of that for
Yeah.
a month. That's
Well,
pretty
it's
much
that
all I
being
did for a month.
starting early, being prepared to talk about it, and then talking
Right.
about it more, and then talking about it more, and then talking about it more.
And
Talking about
talking about it more and
like,
talking about it more and talking
mhm.
about it more.
And so I
Don't
think
stop talking about it.
right, because I think there is like some misconception that you put out a crowdfunding thing and it's just gonna
Yeah.
seed itself, and it's almost like sitting back and doing nothing work, which we know is true
No.
of almost nothing in this world,
That is true
including
of
that.
nothing.
Right. It's
Like,
work. It's
right.
it's constant efforting, it's talking about it. Things that can make people very uncomfortable if you're not used to that. Like you said,
Yeah.
having to learn to flex that asking muscle, the
Right.
flexing, the talking about yourself muscle. And
Right.
so knowing that before you go in that you're going to be challenged in that way. And if that's not something you're ready for, then
Right.
crowdfunding may not be the thing for you.
Yeah.
Um and just that it's all like it's a long haul too, so it can get draining, so you got to be
So
prepared for
draining.
that. And
Yeah.
also the piece of you may not reach your goal, and so because that
Right.
happened with your initial goal wasn't where you got to, how did you deal with
Yeah.
that?
I think I dealt with that pretty well only because I knew that was a possibility from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of an experimenter by nature, so
Mhm.
that part wasn't too hard. But if you're someone who really needs to concretely map it out, like I had it sort of in my head. Like I didn't have like anything written,
Yeah.
but I had at least looked within my Square system to know, okay, I can make a quick donation link if I want to pivot. I knew that I could do those things and do it pretty quickly. Like the pivot was simple. The building of the original pitch was much harder. And what I'll say is that here's my little like sneaky advice. Go to Kickstarter and maybe even sign up for an account there so that you get their preparation materials because they are top notch. Like I watched most of their prep videos and like explaining how to make a good pitch, how to write it, how to do videos, like things like that in Kickstarter. And but you don't have to use Kickstarter if
Well, of
you
course
don't
not.
want to.
Yeah.
Now you can. I
Especially
think there's
yeah. But
advantages
especially
using
if
a
you're not gonna
platform,
reach if there's a chance you don't reach your goal, I think some of
right?
that is to
They
ensure
take
that
a cut too. That's the other thing.
yeah. And I mean, I
Um,
understand their model because it's like we don't want you
yeah,
to raise money and then not be able to deliver on something and leave people hanging. So I get
totally.
why.
I
But
totally get why they
yeah,
do it, and
yeah,
it makes it really hard for
yeah,
things like a podcast that can get by with less money. Honestly,
yeah, right.
like, but they a lot of people make products on there. If they only got a
Of
third
course.
of their money, they're not going to be able to make the product they're promising
Exactly.
people. Like that
Yeah,
wouldn't work.
exactly.
So I get it.
Yeah. And I think one other thing is just that piece that you mentioned about tapping into other people's audiences, not just people with
Mm,
bigger money to give, but also people have
right,
bigger audiences than yours that you're able to,
right,
that you can kind of tap into through them. Because if you have 50 people on your email list, it's not to say that you can't raise $5,000, but it's going to be a bigger uphill battle than if you're walking into a Kickstarter or crowdsourcing or crowdfunding kind of campaign with a giant social media following, a giant email
right,
list, whatever. So just know that it's important, I think, also to right size your expectations to your existing in sphere of influence, and then also think, how can I tap into other people's sphere of influence to
for
widen mine if I don't
sure.
have a large one. So
Yeah, and that's where like the podcast like FBC came in really handy because a number of people had me do like Substack lives or other kinds of live conversations about the crowdfunding with them. A lot of people, and then even with those some of those people who, with at least one that I can think of, someone who said, "No, I'm not going to be able to give right now." I said, "Well, you have a network. Like, would you share it in your net? Like, these are other." And I was constantly giving people options of what they could do to share, and people
yeah,
did that a lot for me. I don't know at the end of the day that very many people gave because of that, though. That was really interesting. Like,
But it
unless
is
they were
interesting to
mutual connections, you know what I mean?
true,
They had to be mutual
true.
connections to me,
But going back to
but it
the
still helped.
when your show launches, the awareness is out
Oh,
there. So that may not be
totally.
the goal of the crowdfunding
Right.
effort, but it can be one of those byproducts of it too, is that increased visibility. So
Yeah. I
that's
mean, I might
all.
make it a primary goal if I were to crowdfund again, because
Yeah.
I mean, the money would be number 2 as the
That can be
goal
really interesting
almost.
though, Nicole, is to instead of the crowdfunding effort being people raising money, that they commit to a certain number, sharing the podcast a certain number of
Hmm.
times or something, and then seeing
Oh, that's an
does
interesting
that
idea. Yeah.
right? And then does that effort relate to a spike
Yeah, yeah.
in downloads or whatever?
Yeah.
We're just brainstorming here. Somebody try it and tell
I
us.
love it.
When
Yeah,
you try it
right?
for season
I
two.
might
I think
try
that could
for it sometime. Yeah, exactly.
right? And now with
Right.
AI, there's really fun ways you can create like leaderboards and point systems and
Totally.
make it, have
Make
gamified.
it fun.
Anyway,
Right.
we've hit our time and I don't want to go too long
Right.
because I'm trying to keep these short, which is hard for
Yeah.
most folks like us. But thank you for doing this, Nicole. Your
Sure.
podcast is Just Rest. The first season's out right now.
It
You're on
is.
like a hiatus, but still content being shared because you're
Yeah,
repurposing, which is a
for
great
sure.
example for people to see how that can look, right? To do
Yeah.
that while you're still giving yourself some
It's
increased
been a
downtime.
blast to
Yeah.
share those actually, and
Yeah.
I'm listening to episode I just dropped one today, as a matter of fact, that was recorded over a year ago, and I was like, "Oh, I would answer that question really differently now."
I think
So,
it's
anyway,
amazing that you re-listened. I would just drop it without
I
listening because I don't want to hear myself. But anyway, so go check out Just Rest. I'll link to it and I'll link to your website as well if you're interested in more about Nicole and your work,
Yeah,
coaching work around burnout. So
right,
thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for being a member of
right.
FPC and I really appreciate
I
you.
Of course. No, thank you. I appreciate it, Becky.